Hello, and today I'll be teaching you how to make a computer. You're gonna need a motherboard, a graphics card, a CPU, a power supply, RAM, an SSD or hard drive, and this is optional, but you can have a Wi-Fi card. Now onto our first step. Our first step, we're gonna take out the motherboard, the CPU, and the RAM for our first step. And then for our first step, we're gonna take out of the plastic wrap, and you want to set the motherboard on top of the box. Take out the CPU and make sure you line up the triangles on the motherboard of the CPU so it doesn't damage the pins underneath, and then set it down. Once you set it down, push it like a little bit left to the right, make sure it's all in there and snug, and then you're gonna want to push the pin down so it latches the CPU and doesn't fall or unscrew the cooler mounts from the motherboard, and install the CPU cooler. Once you unscrew the CPU mount, put on the CPU cooler on top of the CPU and make sure it lines up with the 4 screw holes so you can screw it in. Once you line it up, make sure it's all lined up. You screw in all 4 sides of the CPU cooler. Make sure they're not too tight. Make sure it's a little loose and not as tight as you can, because that can damage the motherboard. Next up, we're going to install a RAM. Make sure you match up the colors for the RAM slots if you're using 2. So you're going to want to match up the colors and push the pins down from both sides. And then you're going to want to put in the RAM stick, and you're going to want to apply pressure until you hear it click. For our next step, we're going to install our power supply. And to do that, you're going to need to unscrew the back screws or the back mount and slide it in. And then you're going to need to screw the mount to the power supply and into the case. Now, after you're done installing the power supply, you're going to want to take your hard drive or SSD, and then take out an SSD slot or hard drive slot. You want to screw it onto the little slider onto the SSD or hard drive, and then you're going to want to connect it to the power supply. Before you install the motherboard, you're going to need to put in the I/O shield so that you know where to line up the motherboard with. So you can put in like any USBs and headphones and microphones that plug in. Now what we're going to want to do is install our motherboard to the case. It's really simple. All you need to do is line it up with the case and the screw holes, and then just screw it in with the right screws that come with your motherboard manual. Once you install all the parts of the motherboard and the hard drive, the SSD, and the power supply, now it's time for the graphics card. First, you're going to want to unscrew the PCI slot so you can fit your graphics card in to the slot and onto the motherboard. And in order to install the graphics card, all you're gonna need to do is match it up with the PCI slot and just apply pressure and push it in until you hear the click. And for this last part, it's just the cables. Everyone's computer is different with cables, so I recommend you look at your manual to plug in all the cables. All cables and all the parts on the motherboard for the cables should be labeled, so it shouldn't be that hard of a process. But I'll leave this video as a reference for the cables and where to plug them into and how you should plug them in. Good.